I do want to quickly show my hat. It is a rainbow pride leaf hat, but today I'm just wearing it backwards. Mainly for fashion, partly for the shame. Not from being queer, from being a Leafs fan, obviously. Hey buds, how's it going? I am MC and happy Pride Month, everybody. I don't know about you, but I have kind of felt like the whole first half of this year has been a bit of a Pride Month, and more like a real Pride Month with more protesting than partying. That's okay, because it's still the most wonderful time of the year. And I personally love that every few hundred years, cis-het people rediscover that queer and trans people exist and do everything in their power to erase it, suppress it, and invalidate it. So it's not exhausting at all. But that's kind of what this video is about today. Today I'm doing a figure study of a statue called the Sleeping Hermaphroditus. And it's kind of actually two figure studies in one because I couldn't decide which side of the statue I wanted to do, so I'm doing both. I finished the first half of the figure study earlier today, and I'm getting ready to start the second half now. So yeah, just a super cute. So yeah, just a super really quick intro from me today, just to say hi. I'm really pleased with the way the first half of this figure study went, and I'm excited to get started on the second half. And there's a lot of interesting research that I did for this video that I'm really excited to share. So I'm ready to just get into it. So this is a figure study of the Sleeping Hermaphroditus. It's a marble sculpture from around 100 to 150 CE and is a Roman copy of a Greek original from the 2nd century BCE. It's on display at the Louvre and is 173 centimeters long and is typically displayed on a mattress that was added by Gian Lorenzo Bernini in 1620. I left the mattress out and some of the other restorations that have been made to this statue just because I wanted to focus on the figure itself, and I always just kind of love an old broken statue. But I really had been wanting to do another figure study for a while. I was actually hoping that it would be a classical female nude of some sort, and I have a few options for figure studies saved on my phone, but nothing was really striking inspiration until I came across this statue. I put on a YouTube video of a timeline documentary about Caligula by the historian Mary Beard, where they first show the view of the statue from behind, and as soon as I saw it, I said, I like that. And then I loved it when they showed the front of it and I realized it was a statue of Hermaphroditus. I had first learned about them in the brief retelling of their origin story from Stephen Fry in his book Mythos, and that was the only place I had seen any mention of Hermaphroditus until I saw this statue. So when I decided that this was the next drawing that I wanted to do, it gave me a really good excuse to do some more research about them. They're the child of Hermes and Aphrodite and is a character from ancient Greek mythology that is and always has been visibly androgynous. They're most commonly illustrated with male genitalia, breasts, and often share a lot of similar facial features with Aphrodite. The oldest statue we have of Hermaphroditus is the statue of Hermaphroditus from Pergamon, which is a Greek statue from the 3rd century BCE and is life-size, standing around 186 centimeters tall. And from around the same time, the earliest written record of rituals performed by the cult of Hermaphroditus are from the 3rd century BCE Greek historian Philochorus. The origins of Hermaphroditus can even be traced back as far as 7000 BCE, seeming to have evolved from the Eastern mother goddess cult, where Hermaphroditus and similar deities may have been more of a symbol of marriage and part of a sacred marriage ritual. In Mythos, Stephen Fry retells the Roman poet Ovid's origin myth for Hermaphroditus. Ovid included the myth of Hermaphroditus and Salmachus in his poem The Metamorphoses, which was published in the year 8 CE and tells the stories of over 250 myths. some that Ovid might be citing from earlier writers and retelling himself, and others where he's just making things up and creating his own new myths. And that's where I'm going to start. Ovid writes, "Hear how the magic pool of Salmachus found its ill fame, and why its strengthless waters soften and enervate the limbs they touch. All know its famous power, but few the cause. To Hermes runs the tale, and Aphrodite, a boy was born, whom in Mount Ida's caves the Naiads nurtured. In his face he showed father and mother, and took his name from both. When thrice 5 years passed, the youth forsook Ida, his fostering home, his mountain haunts, eager to roam strange lands afar, to see strange rivers, hardships softened by delight. The towns of Lycia he reached at last, and Caria's marching provinces, and there he saw a pool, a limpid, shining pool, clear to its very bottom. No marsh reed, no barren sedge grew there, no spiky rush. The water crystal clear, its margin ringed with living turf and verdure always green. A nymph dwelt there, not one to bend the bow, or join the hunt, or run to win the race. She was the only water sprite unknown to swift Diana. Many a time her sisters chide her, 'Come, Salmachus, get out your spear, or painted quiver, vary your hours of ease with hardships of the chase.' Yet never spear she took, nor painted quiver, nor would vary her hours of ease with hardships of the chase, but in her pool would bathe her lovely limbs, and with a comb of boxwood dress her hair, and gazing long, take counsel of the waters what style were best. Now on the soft green grass, or on soft leaves in gauzy dress she lay, now gathering flowers, and gathering chanced to see the boy, and seeing saw her heart's desires. Yet though her heart would haste, she paused a while, till dress inspected, all in order placed, charm in her eyes set shining. She deserved to look so lovely, then began to speak. 'Fair boy, you seem, how worthy you seem, a god, and if a god, Cupid himself, or if a mortal, happy pair they, who gave you birth. Blessed is your brother, blessed indeed your sister, if you have one, and the nurse who suckled you, but far, oh far more blessed, she your betrothed, found worthy of your love. If there is one, let stolen joy be mine. If none, let me be her, make me your bride.' This said, she held her peace. A rosy blush dyed the boy's cheeks. He knew not what love was, but blushes well became him, like the bloom of rosy apples hanging in the sun, or painted ivory, or when the moon glows red beneath her pallor, and the gongs resound in vain to rescue her eclipse. Then the nymph pleaded, begged, besought at least, a sister's kiss, and made to throw her arms around his ivory neck. 'Enough,' he cried, 'have done, or I shall quit this place, and you.' Fear struck her heart. 'I yield this place,' she said, 'stranger to you,' and turned away as if to leave him. Then, with many a backwards glance, she vanished in the leafy undergrowth, and crouched in hiding there. The boy alone, he thought, on the empty sward and unobserved, strolled to and fro, and in the rippling water dipped first his toes, then ankle-deep, and soon, charmed by the soothing coolness of the pool, stripped his light garments from his slender limbs. Then Salmachus gazed spellbound, and desire flamed for his naked beauty, and her eyes blazed bright as when the sun's unclouded orb shines dazzling in a mirror. She scarce could bear to wait, hardly postpone her joy. She longed to embrace him, scarce contained her frenzied heart. He clapped his hollow palms against his sides and dived into the pool, and as he swam arm over arm, gleamed in the limpid water. He clapped his hollow palms against his side and dived into the pool, and as he swam arm over arm, gleamed in the limpid water, like in a guarded dome of crystal glass, white lilies, or a figure of ivory. 'I've won, he's mine,' she cried, and flung aside her clothes and plunged far out into the pool, and grappled him as he struggled, forced her kisses willy-nilly, fondled him, caressed him, now on one side, now on the other, clung to him as he fought to escape her hold, and so at last entwined him, like a snake seized by the king of birds and borne aloft, which as it hangs coils around its head and claws, and with its tail entwines his spreading wings, or ivory wrapping round tall forest trees, or in the sea a squid whose whipping arms seize and from every side surround their prey. The youth fought back, denied the nymph her joy. She strained the more. Her clinging body seemed fixed fast to his. "Fool, fight me as you will," she cried. "You'll not escape. Ye gods ordain, no day shall ever dawn to part us twain." Her prayer found gods to hear. Both bodies merged in one, both blended in one form and face, as when a gardener sets a graft and sees growth seal the join and both mature together. Thus when in fast embrace their limbs were knit, they two were two no more, nor man nor woman, one body then that neither seemed, and both. So when he saw the waters of the pool, where he had dived a man, had rendered him half woman, and his limbs now weak and soft, raising his hands, Hermaphroditus cried, voice unmanned, "Dear father and dear mother, both of whose names I bear, grant me your child, that whoso in these waters bathes a man, emerge half woman, weakened instantly." Both parents heard, both moved to gratify their bisect son, his purpose to ensure, drugged the bright water with that power impure. The end. That was the Oxford World Classics version of the Metamorphoses, translated by A.D. Melville. And holy smokes, that is a lot of metaphors to get through in one story. But this is obviously a very imperfect story, and it's a story of the outcome of an assault, essentially. And a lot of the stories in the Metamorphoses are about gods like Zeus transforming into something to assault someone. So it's not an uncommon theme for Ovid and Greek mythology, unfortunately. But the story starts with Hermaphroditus born in a cave on Mount Ida and raised and cared for by nymphs. When he turns 15, he wants to explore and experience real life, the good and the bad, and so he leaves Mount Ida to travel. He arrives in Caria, which is modern-day Turkey, and discovers an idyllic pool with the clearest waters and lush vegetation all around it, and this is where Salmacis lives. She's a lazy water nymph and quite the opposite to Hermaphroditus. Where he leaves his cave to seek hardships softened by delight, Salmacis has no interest in doing the same. She's encouraged by the other nymphs, but she doesn't want to hunt or exercise. She just lounges by the pool all day long, bathing in it or using the water as a mirror to help her style her hair. And it's while she's lounging by the pool that she spots Hermaphroditus come into the clearing and instantly becomes obsessed with him. She addresses Hermaphroditus with a long and weird speech about how beautiful he is, and finishes by asking to be his lover, whether he has one already or not. Hermaphroditus flushes but says nothing, because how do you respond to such a creepy outburst like that? And they stand in silence until Salmacis throws herself at Hermaphroditus, but he manages to stop her the first time. She leaves the clearing, checking over her shoulder as she does, as if he's going to beg for her to come back, but doesn't get very far and hides herself in the bushes to spy on him. When he thinks he's alone, he takes off his clothes and dives into the pool, and this is when Salmacis dives in after him and attacks him for a second time. This time clinging onto him and calling out to the gods to make her and Hermaphroditus inseparable. And I don't know if Salmacis meant for them to be inseparable in the way that it happens, or why the gods even thought that this was a prayer worth answering in the first place, but they do answer it by combining the two of them into one being. Hermaphroditus sees his reflection in the pool, apparently seeing himself as having been weakened by his new feminine qualities, calls out to his parents, Aphrodite and Hermes, to curse the pool and make any man that swims in it impotent. And despite the trans character in this myth, it is not at all a good example of trans allyship. Hermaphroditus' transition is the result of an assault and the wish of his attacker. Of course, he doesn't receive his trans identity positively because of this, and maybe today you could interpret that and relate it to people who might be queer in some way and wish they weren't because they've been told it's wrong their whole life. But regardless, this story doesn't have a happy ending for Hermaphroditus. It's also definitely not a feminist story with people automatically being weakened by just being touched by something feminine. So definitely not a story to base your morals off of, but I don't think any 2,000-year-old translated and retranslated book is, to be fair. Anyway, it's not the morality that interests me about this myth. What does is that it's a story about an ancient trans identity. I think the concept of somebody being trans is so new to some people that they think it's just new in general. Like somebody wanted a new way to be special, so they invented being transgender in 2015 or something like that. But transness, androgyny, gender fluidity, whatever word you want to put to it, is not a new thing when it comes to human history. We have thousands of years of evidence of it, and Ovid is just one example of that. Hermaphroditus is one of the characters in the Metamorphoses that he's referencing from earlier writers while he adds his own embellishments to the story. In Ovid's myth, Hermaphroditus is not born trans but made trans during his struggle to defend himself from Salmachus, but there is other writings where Hermaphroditus is born trans. The 2nd century BCE Greek poet Nicander of Colophon also included Hermaphroditus in his work the Heteromena, which, similar to Ovid, means transformations. This is lost to us now, but in it he wrote that Hermaphroditus had been born with their androgynous features. And just a useless side note, the title Heteromena, I'm absolutely not sure if I'm saying that right, but I thought it was really interesting to come across this word during my research for this video because it kind of flips the way we use hetero and homo and trans and cis. Instead of using trans, hetero is used to describe something morphing into something else or going to the opposite of what it was. Very unimportant, but I just kind of thought it was very interesting to see the opposite way those words could be used for something like that, if that makes sense. Anyway, there's also Diodorus Siculus, who was a Greek historian from the 1st century BCE, and he echoed Nicander's version of Hermaphroditus' origins in the 4th book of the Bibliotecha Historica, writing, quote, "Hermaphroditus, as he has been called, who was born of Hermes and Aphrodite, and received a name which is a combination of those of both his parents. Some say that this Hermaphroditus is a god and appears at certain times among men, in that he has a physical body which is a combination of that of a man and that of a woman, in that he has a body which is beautiful and delicate like that of a woman, but has the masculine quality and vigor of a man. But there are some who declare such creatures of two sexes are monstrosities, and coming rarely into the world as they do, they have a quality of presaging the future, sometimes for good and sometimes for evil." And I think you could kind of gloss over the line, "Some say that Hermaphroditus is a god and appears at certain times among men," as meaning the god himself coming down from Olympus to spend time with the people. But I'm pretty sure that the common belief around this time would have been that people thought that the gods messed with their lives through prophecies from oracles or omens, and not really that the god would be present there in the moment, just adjusting things on the spot. They would just send signs through animal entrails during sacrifices and make birds do weird shit to let you know if something good or bad was going to happen, which makes me think that what Diodorus is actually saying here is that there are people that exist that have the same characteristics as Hermaphroditus, and he also mentions that they're not as common as, for a lack of a better term, cis people, which is obviously the same as we see today. And of course, it's still a transphobic quote, with Diodorus mentioning that some people think that people of two sexes are monstrosities. But by saying some, that does at least sound like he's also heard from other people that are more accepting, or maybe just aren't bothered by it at all, like normal people, because it's none of your business. Anyway, and this is also kind of a useless side note, but the last part of this quote that I found interesting was mentioning that they had the ability to see the future, sometimes for evil and sometimes for good. This is just me running my mouth now, so definitely don't take what I'm saying as gospel, but I believe the Bibliotecha Historica would have probably been written pretty close to around the same time of the assassination of Julius Caesar and the foundation of the Roman Empire. And in the Roman Empire, if I'm remembering correctly, something like seeking out the emperor's horoscope was punishable by death, because if you were looking for his horoscope, you might be trying to find out when or how he dies, if you can overthrow him and take his power, or something like that. Obviously, I'm not sure if this is a belief that would be similar to something pre-Empire Greeks or Romans would have bought into, but it still did become something that had a taboo to it in certain circumstances. And I thought it was an interesting connection. It just kind of feels a lot like what we see today in making a boogeyman out of nothing to create anti-LGBTQ propaganda. But just to play devil's advocate, maybe it proves that trans and queer people were actually looking into the future to plan the events of the gay agenda and finding out how and when we're going to take over the world and corrupt your children to be kinder people. Anyway, so the origin stories we have for Hermaphroditus have these themes of impotency and effeminacy to them, but that's actually the opposite of the prehistoric mother goddess cult that it's believed that they evolved from. It was a cult that encouraged fertility, rebirth, and regeneration. In the third book of his Saturnalia, the 5th century Roman writer Macrobius references a Greek historian from the 3rd century BCE, Philochorus. He wrote a history of the cities of Attica and Athens called the Athis of Philochorus, and it records one of the ways the cult of Hermaphroditus may have worshipped the deity. Macrobius writes that, quote, "In his Athis, Philochorus too states that she is also the moon, and that men sacrifice to her in women's dress, women in men's, because she is held to be both male and female." And that sounds like a great time at a gay bar to me. But this seems to be a record of ancient ritual practice that was passed down through many different cultures over thousands of years. The Mother Goddess cult is the oldest cult that we know of, and I think the easiest way to kind of make sense of it is sort of by conflating it with Mother Earth. A lot of the festivals associated with the Mother Goddess were New Year and Spring fertility festivals that celebrated things like regeneration and rebirth. And part of the process for this renewal of the earth involved something called the Hieros Gamos rite, which means sacred marriage. The rite would take place between the Mother Goddess and what was called her Peridros, which was the male assistant or companion of the Mother Goddess that would impregnate her. And during a festival, these two roles may have been represented by the king and queen of a city or state. These festivals were practiced in order to renew all types of life on Earth, and then they also became associated with divine kingship. So like how an Egyptian pharaoh would have seen themselves as a god on earth, the herosgamos rite and the marriage between a king and a mother goddess helped solidify that deification. And then it's in Neolithic times that these two roles of the mother goddess and her paradros start to merge into one form. While doing the research for this video, I ended up reading Irene, Marcella, Adrian, Czako, CZAKO. I really hope I'm saying that right. But I read her master's thesis called The Origin of the Hermaphrodite in Greek Art, and I think this was written in the 1980s, so please excuse some of the outdated language that's used. But overall, I found this a very interesting and pretty progressive source of information. In her thesis, Czako says, quote, "If the paradros was not represented with the goddess or vice versa, the sculptural image of the single deity would be bisexual and take on the characteristics of the other sex." And these types of androgynous sculptures represented the absolute power of all the elements that bring life into the world. And if these statues presented more masculine or feminine, it depended on the culture that they were a part of. So a more patriarchal society would have a more masculine mother goddess, and a more matriarchal society would have a more feminine one. So with Hermaphroditus, we're looking at the most recent Athenian tradition of the herosgamos rite, with Aphrodite as our mother goddess and Hermes as our paradros. And Czako talks about the other divine couples from other cultures that would have been involved in this rite, being Anat and Baal in Ugarit, Ishtar and Tammuz in Babylonia, Isis and Osiris in Egypt, Cybele and Attis in Anatolia, and in Syria and Cyprus, just a little bit different from the Athenians, it would have been Aphrodite and Adonis instead of Hermes. The cult of the mother goddess originated with rituals practiced in caves in Cyprus and Mycenae, and in the Minoan period, as early as 3000 BCE, it might have transferred into a palace cult, where we start to see the herosgamos rite beginning to be associated with divine kingship in Egypt and Mesopotamia. In all its evolutions and the different ways it was practiced over thousands of years and through different cultures, Czako says that, quote, "The mother goddess cult has an uninterrupted continuity from prehistoric times to the end of classical antiquity." Most of the more modern statues that we have of Hermaphroditus, like the one that I'm drawing, are described as decadent Hermaphrodites. So statues without cult significance that were basically just made for the aesthetic appeal of the viewer. But some ancient writers have referenced the bearded Aphrodite in their works, which is believed to be the direct predecessor to Hermaphroditus. A statue of the priest with a dove found in Paphos, Cyprus, is believed to be a depiction of the bearded Aphrodite. It's part of the Saturnalia collection at the Met in New York City, and is dated back to around 500 BCE. It stands over 7 feet tall and is bearded with long hair and breasts, and they also hold a dove in their left hand, which is one of Aphrodite's most prominent symbols. And even though some people try to pass off the priest's features as oddities of Cypriot sculpture, the hair and breasts are sculpted very similarly to other 6th century BCE Greek statues of women, but the robes that the priest wears are different from any of the clothing worn by other female sculptures in the Saturnalia collection. The statue also has Cypriot symbols carved into its shoulder that mean of the Paphian goddess, which I guess you could read as a priest of the Paphian goddess, but these symbols were also used to distinguish statues of Aphrodite herself and used to avoid confusion with statues of other goddesses. And I'm absolutely not an expert in the lore of the mother goddess, so I'm going to link Irene Czako's thesis below. The amount of names of festivals and deities and cultures that this spanned across made my head spin a bit, and I was just trying to stay focused on Hermaphroditus for this video, but it was a very interesting read if you want to learn more about it for yourself. And I do kind of just love this backstory for Hermaphroditus because it's the homophobic narrative that you hear from a lot of Christians, that God created marriage for man and woman. And yeah, God might have created marriage, but it wasn't the Christian God like you think it was. It was actually the trans God, and I think that's pretty cool. And yeah, technically the sacred marriage ritual was still about the union between a man and a woman, but personally, I think we could interpret this kind of representation of the union of quote-unquote man and woman as less of something that must show us what people thought was right and what people thought was wrong, and more as ancient people maybe just saying having babies is important because it's kind of really easy to die in the year 500 BCE and we only have one way to do it. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure there's no archaeological evidence of an Iron Age turkey baster. And I think that shows with the first evidence of Hermaphroditus popping up in Athens around the end of the 5th century BCE, after a plague in 430 and the Peloponnesian Wars from 431 to 404 BCE that caused a major decline in the population of Athens. Czako writes, quote, "In order to counteract this development, every male Athenian, in addition to his legally married spouse, was instructed to mate with another woman in order to increase the population." And so the domestic cult of Hermaphroditus starts, and it seems to have been quite popular, combining the goddess of love, Aphrodite, with the very masculine god of Hermes to encourage fertility and prosperity. Around the time of the Punic Wars, 264 to 146 BCE, the Romans started writing in Greek and adopting elements of Hellenistic culture in an attempt to broaden their influence in the Mediterranean, and this is when we start to see Hermaphroditus and other Greek gods start to trickle into the Roman pantheon. And with the more conservative nature of the Roman society, this is probably where we start to see more stories of Hermaphroditus' effeminacy being written. Stephen Fry writes in Mythos that the Romans considered the condition of being intersex to be a disorder that, quote, threatened the strict militaristic norms of their society. But regardless of how we see the progression from Mother Goddess to Hermaphroditus and how things changed over time, how the visual representation, symbolism and meanings, and cultural significance and practices changed, or even just having different language to describe the people that existed and the events that were happening, I think it's obvious to see that androgyny, gender fluidity, and transness are not new things. Czako says in the introduction to her thesis that, quote, archaeological and literary evidence substantiate that double-natured deities such as Hermaphroditus had been present, I wish. Czako says in the introduction to her thesis that, quote, archaeological and literary evidence substantiate that double-natured deities such as Hermaphroditus had been present from the earliest times. Thus, they prove that the concept of his dual nature was not new, only his name and the myths associated with him were in actuality an innovation. And I think that says it all. Now we just have the education available to us and the language to more accurately describe what being trans is and what being queer is. And I personally think that vocabulary should be limitless because the beauty of it is that everyone's experience is unique to them. It's been really difficult for me to keep the script for this video just about Hermaphroditus, because the more I read, the broader the origins for them got, and I got more confused wondering how society had been so successful in erasing trans and queer identities for literally thousands of years, over and over again. I constantly see people suggesting that the lack of older or elderly queer people now is proof that it's all just a phase and you'll grow out of it and it's made up, I guess. But the easy explanation for that is the AIDS crisis in the 80s and 90s. Communities of queer people were wiped out, and a lot of people that are searched for to be used as measuring sticks or proof to validate people telling you what they are didn't get to grow old. And there was no urgency for research into how to stop or prevent it because of the type of people that were being affected by it. And obviously we still ignore the effect that it had. Another example of erasure is Magnus Hirschfeld. He was a German physician and sexologist, and he founded the Scientific Humanitarian Committee, as well as the World League for Sexual Reform. And in 1919, he opened the Institute for Sexual Wissenschaft, the Institute for Sexual Research in Berlin. And for all the biology obviously isn't your strong suit bros when they want to talk about trans people, Hirschfeld's motto was through science to justice. And I think I'm gonna take his word over someone whose highest level of education in biology was grade 10 science. Thanks so much. But the Institute for Sexual Research pioneered research and treatment for queer identities, trans and intersex people, and also for things like eroticism and fetishes. It also provided marital and sex counseling, treatment for addiction and STDs, and access to reproductive health and contraception. They offered free medical advice for everyone and free treatment to people who couldn't afford it. The main goals of the Institute were to learn, educate, and advocate, and on May 6, 1933, Nazis sacked and looted the Institute. Every book was taken from the library, and 4 days later were included in a public book burning of over 25,000 books. And it's thought that that book burning set the education of sex and gender identity back by 100 years. So now in 2025, we have 8 years left to prove that wrong, and I really hope we can. But even still, when you hear about this book burning now, the works you hear about being included in it are from people like Karl Marx, Albert Einstein, and Sigmund Freud. You rarely hear about Hirschfeld or his institute. So it can be something as major as a Nazi book burning, or something that seems as minor as something like the Renaissance artist Michelangelo writing romantic poetry about men, only to have his grandnephew publish those poems in 1623 with the pronouns changed from he, him to she, her, and insisting that they were just metaphorical. The erasure and invalidation of trans and other queer identities keeps happening with different varieties of force and violence used, and it's unbelievably frustrating and infuriating. And honestly, even if it's a bit harsh, I just kind of think you look stupid if that's the hill you want to die on. I'm absolutely not an expert. I've never taken a classics or antiquities class. I just love to learn this stuff for fun, but I'm pretty confident in my research and it was pretty easy to find. And all of the proof is there. Trans people documented in ancient art, poetry, and history. They're there, we're here now, and we always will be. By the time I'm getting this video out, it'll be early July, but this was a really great project to work on through Pride Month for me. I absolutely love this statue so much, and it's one of my favorites now. And I'm really proud of the drawing I did of it. I feel like I nailed this one, if I do say so myself. And I got to spend the whole month educating myself on some queer history, which I need to do more of, honestly. But yeah, I hope you found this video interesting, and I hope I laid it out in a digestible way. It was honestly crazy to me how many rabbit holes I could have kept going down, and it took me a while to organize it, but I really enjoyed the whole process of making this video. And I really hope that everyone had a safe and happy Pride Month. I really can't express how proud I am to be part of such a diverse and amazing community. And please keep your head up, no matter where you are in your personal journey or where we are in our journey as a community trying to make space for ourselves in this horrible world. It can only get better, and we'll throw bricks again if we have to. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Take care, and you'll see me in the next one.